Good afternoon, friends. Good afternoon, and welcome to the book discussion that we have this afternoon. My name is Lawrence Iwuamadi, and I'm a Roman Catholic priest and the professor of biblical hermeneutics at the Ecumenical Institute. We also serve as the vice dean. In the panel with me here, we are supposed to be, well, 5 of us, but one person is not present. We have Professor Dr. Isabel Apawo Phiri, Reverend Dr. Dietrich Werner, Dr. Benjamin Simon, Reverend Dr. Elieshi Ayo Mungure, who is not present, and Reverend Dr. Henry Mbaya. When I think of panels, always there is something that comes to my mind. The words of Scott Kirstner. He said, the panel discussion was invented by someone who liked to sit 3 feet above his audience, talk with 5 of his closest friends for an hour, and barely acknowledge that there are 100 other people in the room, usually sitting in uncomfortable chairs. But I think it doesn't apply in our own case, because I think nobody's sitting 3 feet above others, and the seats are more or less the same. And most importantly is that we are here to discuss, to talk about a book that deals with an issue that is very important to all of us. We are here to discuss this book, to launch it, Anthology of African Christianity. The co-editors of we are lucky to have 2 of the co-editors here. The book is edited by Isabel Apawo Phiri, Dietrich Werner, Chammah, Kaunda, and Kennedy Owino, and published by Regnum Studies in Global Christianity, 2016. We have to really acknowledge as well the work that went into the production of this book, our WCC publication here, the EDE, and the Bread for the World for all their support. Immense support they gave towards the publication of, towards this publication. And so we are grateful for that. To go ahead, I want to begin with a simple question, or 2 simple questions. Did you know that Christianity is growing faster in Africa than anywhere else in the world? And it is said that in the next 4 years, a quarter of the world Christians will be living in that continent, unless they run across the Mediterranean Sea. This shows the timely nature of the volume we are talking about. Anthology of African Christianity. Mind you, we're not talking about Christianity in Africa. It is African Christianity. The flyer that we received says, this volume is the most comprehensive look at African Christianity and African theology in a generation, an invaluable historical and analytical resource. It also addresses the contemporary social and political issues facing Christians on the continent, and I will say globally as well. Well, with the panelists here, we initially agreed that we will have 5 minutes each. But because one of the panelists is not present, we see how it goes. So I allow you to take some more minutes. And after their presentation, Then the floor will be open for your questions. I would like, as much as possible, for this discussion to really be a discussion. I would really love us to be involved with your questions and with your appreciations and contributions. Our objective with our time today is to have a test of some of the treasures contained in this landmark volume. So I want to begin the process with you, Professor Dr. Isabel Phiri. And I would want to ask you, can you introduce to our audience this landmark volume, the process, the development, and since you are assigned to deal with the part one of the volume, can you tell us what you see to be the most important takeaway from this session? Thank you.
Thank you very much. When I think of this volume, Anthology of African Christianity, it takes us back to the first book that Dietrich and I edited, and it was the Handbook on Theological Education in Africa. At the time, Dietrich was the program executive for Ecumenical Theological Education in WCC, and I was the moderator of a commission on theological education and formation. And at that time, we worked on this book, and when it came out, it was a success. You know, there was high demand, for this book. And that book was launched in 2013, and at that time then I was a member of staff in WCC. And at the end of that first project, it was felt that there was a huge need for more accurate information on how African Christianity has grown and transformed during the last decades in different African regions and traditions, and what has been its role for social, political developments, and value transformation. So a group, from the previous editorial committee was invited again to reflect on this new idea of meeting the need, for a comprehensive book. And so we formed a new group and started thinking seriously on how we can, start working on an anthology of African Christianity. And at that time, it was thought that the goal for the Anthology of African Research, should be to bring together a major reference volume with researched essays and survey articles written by mostly African authors on on contemporary Christianity in Africa and its role for development in all its different facets and diverse forms. So we came up with the idea that, this volume should have, initially we had 6 sub-goals, and later on it turned out to be 7. And the first one was to bring together a couple of general introductory essays on the overall history of African Christianity on the continent, which underline that African Christianity has a distinctive early period of its own and cannot just be explained as the import from Western Christianity during the colonial period. General introductory essays on understanding the crucial role of African Christianity for development on the continent. And 2, to bring together regional surveys articles on contemporary African Christianity and churches in Northern Africa, Western Africa, Eastern Africa, and Southern Africa. And 3, to bring together denominational survey articles on the 7 major families of the Christian denominations in Africa, the Orthodox churches, Roman Catholic churches, churches from historical Reformed background, churches from evangelical background, churches from classical Pentecostal backgrounds, and churches from African independent churches, and churches from neo-Pentecostal or prosperity gospel growth backgrounds. And fourth, to bring together shorter national profiles of Christianity for each of the 54 states within the African continent. And number five, to bring together a selection of key scholars to reflect on crucial issues relating to future trends, challenges for African Christianity, and its public role for development and social transformation in its different settings in the 21st century. And six, to have a resource section with major links and studied sources for theological education and research on the African continent. So this is where we started, at the beginning. And we, logistically we said, each section needs its own, editor. And we asked, different people, to work with us. So mainly it was Dietrich and I, but then we had to work, with the WCC in close cooperation with the All Africa Conference of Churches in Nairobi, and Bread for the World, when Dietrich moved over to work with the Bread for the World. And indeed, we are very grateful for the huge financial resource that Bread for the World has put into this document. And then there was the Trinity Theological College in Accra and the University of KwaZulu-Natal in Pietermaritzburg, South Africa, through the Ujamaa Center. And together, we worked, with the younger scholars as well as the established scholars to make sure that, the process of writing this anthology is also an opportunity for mentoring the younger scholars in African theology, in African Christianity. And so we needed an institution in Africa which would become our administrative center. And fortunately, the University of KwaZulu-Natal agreed, to be that institution that was to be the administrator of our research. And I want to acknowledge here Reverend Professor Roderick Hewitt and Dr. Simanga Kumalo, and then Professor Jared West, for the smooth administration of this project. And as we started working on this document, we invited, scholars, to contribute, and in the end, we had 155 articles, to look at. And we needed a huge team of, editors as well to go through each article and to make sure that, we are meeting, the scholarly needs. But in the process of writing and reflecting on this document, there were some key issues that we had to grapple with. The first one is on the term African Christianity. What does African Christianity mean? For some scholars, African Christianity refers to the churches that were born on the African continent by the African people, addressing the African issues. And that excludes all the, mission churches, coming to Africa. And then we realized that, but that's not how the African Christians understand themselves, because they've come to a stage where they have embraced Christianity and accepts Christianity to be an African religion. So we then allowed, the churches or each denomination to define for themselves, whether really they feel that they are African Christianity or Christianity in Africa. And when you read the document, you will see how, in fact, almost all the denominations embrace the fact that they are part of the African Christianity. And the second issue was that, we know that there's a lot of work that has already been produced in the area of African Christianity. So what is it that we are going to offer out there that is unique? And we felt that, whilst we appreciate the work that has been done, especially by scholars from the global north on African Christianity, we wanted more work that has its origins in the agency of Africans themselves. So more of the African scholars, and theologians to reflect on the realities of African Christianity was what this anthology represents. And then we also realized that this is the project itself is going to be so huge. And in fact, each section can be a book on its own. So how do we hold the whole thing together and make sure that it makes sense and without compromising scholarly abilities? And we said, okay, what we are offering is the initial work. And we are hoping that people will be inspired to, when they read, to go deeper into it. Unfortunately, the global ethics agreed to work with us, and they've created a tree where all these articles in this book are found. And if you read an article and you think something is missing, you are then invited to write your own version, and it will be added to the tree. So we are hoping that this is going to be a huge resource that will continue growing like a tree, and will have lots and lots of articles attached to it. Another major concern was on getting information for the 54 countries. And there it was hard work. And I'm glad to say that, eventually we were able to get, almost 50. Is it? 50 out of the 54 countries. So I think for me, this is a huge success, that we need to be grateful for. And so for the 155 academic papers that we received, we want to acknowledge each and every author of those books. And we also want to acknowledge the work that was done by Chammah Kaunda and Kennedy Owino, because they started off as the associate editors, and then they ended up doing major work in us to bring this work together. And from the front of the book, you can also see that, among the editorial committee, we had Edison Karengo, Priscille, Jomel, Kuzai, Biri, Kwabena, Asamoah, and James Amans and Roderick Hewitt, who contributed in editing, particular sections. But we were also blessed, with, advice coming from people like, Jesse Mugambi, John Mbiti, Esther Mombo, Andre Karamaga, Simon Dosu, and Simanga Kumaro, and Gerard West, and Samuel Johnson, as some of the people that worked with us to make sure that we have a solid document. And we are grateful for those who helped us with language editing, including Nan here, and from Great for the World, we had a person who was set aside to help us with Dorothea, to work on this document. So we are grateful to all those people. In particular, we are also grateful to the help that we received, from Professor Todd Johnson and Dr. Gina Zoru, from Global Christianity, Center for Global Christianity, who helped us with statistics, that have been added to the articles here, to make sure that we have current statistics for each of the countries that we covered. And the whole project was written in the spirit of the pilgrimage of justice and peace. It was a difficult pilgrimage, but we think it's a first stage, and we hope we'll continue with the pilgrimage with more publications as we go on. So in terms of section 1, which I edited, when I read through the articles, I felt that this particular section is very important because it gives us the first taste of the context in which African Christianity has developed. So when you look at the article of James Tenga, he has reminded the reader that African Christianity has deep connections from the birth of Christianity. So we are not just starting with the modern missionary era of the 18th century or the 19th century, but it goes to the very beginning. And he demonstrates why Christianity is called African religion. And then the article of David Ngong has demonstrated the existence of African Christianity over the centuries before the mass evangelization of Africa in the 19th century. And at the same time, when you read the article of Roderick Hewitt, he draws your attention to the fact that when we talk about evangelization of Africa, we have the Caribbeans, coming in as well, to promote the spread of Christianity in West Africa. And the contributions of Africans to the development of African Christianity is well documented by Ovid Kieretswa, who has shown how resistance to colonialization gave birth to initiatives of different forms of African Christianity. And then we have, Hebrew Ndlovu and Kwabena Asamoah and Jesse Mugabe, Afe Adagome and Azoke Uke, who have given the reader a variety of interesting pictures based on analysis of the trends and developments of African Christianity in the context of post-African political independence. Their analysis goes beyond transformations and challenges of Christianity within the churches to an analysis of its contribution to public life in Africa and abroad. So in short, I would say that these are the major issues that you find in this section 1. But I also don't want to forget the importance of the Bible in African Christianity. The article of Gerard West and Musa Dube, gives us, the importance of the Bible in African Christianity. And Musa Dube's article takes us a step further to show us how Christianity actually contributed to empowering men and disempowering women in negotiating, their relationships. And one aspect of African Christianity is its ability to develop side by side with other religions. So we see the articles of John Mbila and Tabona Shoko showing us how African Christianity has grown together with African religion and Islam. I'll stop there.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Isabel. Thank you. Of course, you took more time, but it was necessary to tell the story behind this huge volume that we have here, which is very important. Thank you. The part 2 of this work is not being presented, and it is on regional survey. So we picked only the parts some parts of the book. So we are now going to look at part 3, which is going to be presented by Reverend Dr. Henry Mbaya, who is a senior lecturer in Missiology, University of Stellenbosch, South Africa. And this part 3 is on the history and presence of Christian churches and denominations in Africa. As a historian and missiologist, you have looked at this section, and I will invite you to, first of all, present summarily this session to our audience, but then also to tell us what important insight does one find within this section, and what is just an insight that you discovered while going through this section. Thank you.
Thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to talk about African Christianity. You raised a question. You say about the insight.
I mean, going through this, the particular section 3. What do you see there? Okay, you dealt with the history of the presence of Christian churches and denominations. What strikes you most while you were going through this section? What struck you? What is the takeaway that you think? What do you think that maybe, if you want to see, what contribution do you think? Oh, reading this, African Christianity can bring this to the table.
Well, I mean, for me, what is really striking is the resilience of African Christianity. I think to me that is very, very important, in spite of the challenges that African Christianity has been going through, but the fact that it has withstood all the challenges, I think to me that is very, very critical. And that has defined the moment of African Christianity.
Can you tell us a bit about the articles and just briefly the history? What did you kind of outline?
Yeah, I would like to read what I
okay, that's good.
The denominationalism in Africa, ecumenism. I think to me, of course, these are the things that today define Christianity on the continent of Africa. And really, colonialism is a factor in trying to understand these issues, denominationalism and ecumenism on the continent. And as we know that when Christianity came to Africa, it came to Africa with sort of defined boundaries, which had been defined in Europe for many years. We can think of the Reformation, which is this year 500 years, but even beyond that. And so, just as in politics, Christianity interfaced in mapping Europe in the 16th century. So in the 19th century, Africa, on the continent, it was impacted on by the developments in Europe. And so Western missionary Christianity imported to Africa every blend and brand of Christianity. And soon after the arrival of the missionaries, Africa was like a supermarket where an African would choose from this one big basket. Roman Christianity, English Christianity, or Swiss Christianity, or German Christianity, you name it. It was available for an African. So that impacted on the people of Africa. And so the colonial factor has shaped Christianity, especially and more particularly from 1885 at the Berlin Conference, where Africa was partitioned and allocated to colonial powers. Partition of Africa and allocation of its territories among European nations also had critical implications for European missions. As a result of this, in some cases, certain missionaries dominated in some areas. Ironically, this development also enhanced the pace of missionary expansion. For instance, rivalry between the Roman Catholics and Protestants was one of the features on the continent. An example here would be what happened in West Africa amongst the Igbo. Rivalry between the Holy Ghost Fathers and the Protestant Church. The Protestant Church are the same as were the Anglicans. In Uganda, rivalry between Roman Catholic missionaries and Anglican missionaries led to death and undermining of the Kabaka kingdom. In some cases, even in one denomination, there were all sorts of rivalries. One thinks of, in the Anglican Church, the rivalry between the Church Missionary Society and the University's mission to Central Africa, as well as the SPG. And of course, even in the Roman Catholic Church, there were some rivalries amongst the orders, the Montforts and the White Fathers, one case in point. In Malawi, the battle between Catholic missionaries and the Presbyterian missionaries in Central Africa was so fierce that, according to Ian Linden, one day when the Roman Catholic missionary happened to meet a Dutch Reformed missionary in a place called Doha, the Dutch Reformed missionary had to hide his hand in the pocket so as to avoid greeting the other missionary. And so, as I was growing up, we got to know the hymn Adachi in the Aroma. And this was in late 70s, Adachi in the Aroma. The Dutch Reformed and the Roman Catholics who were in a war. But anyway, we need also to think of about other positive developments and issues that arose. And here I'm thinking about the committee, a committee, COMITY, committee agreements. A committee was a principle by which particular missions were allocated to work in specific geographical areas. It was an attempt to delimit areas of operation for each missionary organization. It was intended to minimize rivalry and duplication of work amongst different organizations, especially between Roman Catholics and Protestants. However, for Africans, it had its own negative effects. In some cases, such zoning coincided with ethnic boundaries, as it happened in Kenya and in Zambia. African families were divided along church denominations. Denominational rivalries from Europe were imported to Africa. Ischei, a woman African scholar, observed that following the context of West Africa, in the context of West Africa, it was observed that to evangelical Protestants, the Catholics brought religion tainted with idolatry. The Protestant missions were simply converting pagans into heretics. So you can see the Catholics and the Protestants, the way they saw each other and the attitudes to each other. And so committee agreements did not always work very, very well. Unless enforced by governments, Protestants or Roman Catholics side would respect them as they would not respect them. Sometimes they saw them as too restrictive. And so the idea of committee seemed also well-intentioned as a means for cooperation among missions. There were also cases where it also worked for colonial governments who were able to use that for the well-being of people in terms of determining social benefits to organizations, schools, and hospitals. The principle of committee has also been viewed not so much in positive light. In Zambia, for example, other churches have been provincial. In the Democratic Republic of Congo, some denominations were created along ethnic and tribal lines. According to Onubiko, the committee principle fortified tribal sentiments and antagonisms. Mwaura has argued that ethnicity has been a byproduct of a divided Christianity. In South Africa, Maluleke attributes the homogeneity of the Tsonga Church as a product of a divided Christianity. The most unfortunate legacy of active collaboration between the colonial order and missionaries has been the genocide in Rwanda. We all agree it's about the legacy from the past. I've been given 2 minutes here. Yeah, I'll try to wind up just now. And so on the African soil, the colonial factor was always entangled with the Christian factor, missionary factor. The extent to this is still an issue of intensive academic debate, and I cannot go into this. During colonial era, there were national, regional ecumenical councils where the African people were not members. Besides discussing common challenges that they faced in the field, such as some aspects of African culture and customs, the forum provided moral support, fellowship amongst the missionaries. For a moment, they could put aside doctrinal differences of their churches as they enjoyed a cup of tea or coffee. Now, there were also golden years of ecumenism in Africa between 1950s and 1970s. And I would go,
So I think we have to stop because we need to catch up. We can come back to it when we're coming to questions. Maybe,
all right, okay.
Yeah, so do you have one simple point you think you need to add?
All right, okay. Yeah, I just want to
just a sentence.
All right, yeah. I mean, the 1950s to the 1970s were the golden years of ecumenism. And a lot happened in Africa. And of course, the formation of the missionary councils laid the foundations for the establishment of the national councils.
Yeah, but I think that will be taken up by the next, on ecumenism will be taken up by Benjamin. Thank you. Thank you. Part 4 wouldn't be presented. It is on the national survey. And so we will move to part 5 that will be presented by Reverend Dr. Benjamin Simon, who is a professor of ecumenical missiology at the Ecumenical Institute at Bossey. Professor Benjamin, I wouldn't be making an overstatement if I say you are a man of two worlds, two continents, Europe and Africa, Germany and precisely Tanzania, if I'm not mistaken, you can correct me. So you understand, you know these worlds. And the part you are presenting is on African Christianity and ecumenism. That's part 5. You have looked at this section. Can you briefly present to us what you found, you discovered in the section of part 5, and this part 5 section of the book? And just a simple question, what do you think? Did you discover anything you think African Christianity can bring to the table of ecumenical discourse globally?
Thank you, dear colleague, for this wonderful and nice introduction. I will try to do my little best. And first of all, I thought about the book's title is Anthology of African Christianity. And the chapter 5, which I have to deal with this morning, is also an anthology as such. And it's if we look at the etymology of anthology, it is anthos, the flower, and the logia, the putting together of flowers. Therefore, I brought some little bucket of flowers with me this morning, because it's really like this. The whole book is a bucket of flowers. Thank you so much to the authors. And already this short chapter number 5, with its 20 articles from very famous and well-known theologians from all over Africa, is a wonderful bucket of flowers. It contains, therefore, a vast variety of positions and opinions, as well as perspectives and viewpoints. Africa is very heterogeneous, so the authors are. Some articles are dealing with the origin of ecumenics in Africa by focusing on the first missionary activities. I quote from the article of James Amanze: "The ecumenical movement and cooperation in Africa has its roots in the missionary factor." At the beginning, Christian denominations were acting very ecumenical. Unfortunately, with the, I quote again, passing of time, this cooperation turned into conflict. The missionaries were more and more dependent from their nations of origin. We heard already about Swiss denominations, German denominations, and so on and so on. And they competed, therefore, for converts. Nevertheless, James Amaze stresses on the fact that, I quote, "at the beginning of the 20th century, many attempts at church unity were underway. Mid of the 20th century and even earlier, quite some national councils were created." Agnes Abuom, our president, concludes in her outstanding contribution that Christian councils have a place and role in African Christianity, enabling internalization of Christianity as an African faith. Those national councils led later on to the foundation of continent-wide ecumenical organizations like, as all of you know, in 1963, the AACC, or African Council of Churches. Edison Kalenzio stresses on the importance of the, I quote, "historic meeting that took place in Ibadan, Nigeria, in 1958, during which the idea of a continental ecumenical body was conceived." In his enlightening contribution, Kalenzio focuses on the diverse programs and relationships of AACC since that time. 3 years after the foundation of AACC, in 1966, the Association of Evangelicals of Africa and Madagascar started. David Nkopi is dealing with the evangelical community without hiding that the various expressions of Christianity is, I quote, "the greatest challenge to the church in Africa." The bucket of ecumenical flowers in Africa goes on with ideas from Roman Catholic side about the family of God model, which would show the tracks if Christianity really hopes to generate a unique voice, to quote the Catholic theologian Peter Uzochukwu from Nigeria. The different Pentecostal communities are also thematized with different national ecumenical associations. The adherents of those groups are indeed an enormous, increasing number of Christians in Africa. Nevertheless, Fidelis Nkomasana is not hiding one main challenge that, I quote, "AACC is not happy with some Pentecostals who have embraced the prosperity gospel." The vast plurality of Christian student movements is also thematized in this bucket of flowers. next to some more denominational oriented, the ecumenical ones are discussed. World Student Christian Federation, Africa region, Youth for Africa, Youth for Christ Africa, Youth Alive Ministries, and others. Strikingly, Girana and Kaunda conclude that, I quote, many students prefer the denominational student movement and not the ecumenical bodies, I would like to add. The diverse programs that WCC and its member churches all over Africa is running is led by our Deputy General Secretary, Isabel Phiri. Among them, she underlines on the importance which plays the theological education in Africa, which, I quote, cannot be overemphasized. The chapter on African Christianity and ecumenism is further on focusing on the contacts to other continents and contacts like the Asian churches, which has a strong need of being extended, so musopole, or to the Latin American churches, which will be, I quote, shaped on the basis of common challenges in terms of poverty and marginalization. Chianeque. A few lines before closing my little contribution, André Caramaga, in the final contribution of that chapter, sees two contradicting faces of African Christianity. On the one hand, the growth, which we heard already at the beginning, in number and the vibrant spirituality. And on the other hand, the confusion between ethnic groups and Christian denominations. Those are for sure challenges that ecumenics in African Christianity encounters. I would like to add that matters of ethics are still dominating ecclesiological questions. This is a pity, because matters of ethics should not lead to the so-called status confessionis. It's not about being church together or not. And we do not have to forget that the African continent is much richer in denominations than, for example, Europe. And Christianity is much younger. In the year of Reformation, we are remembered that it took the Lutherans and the Catholics 500 years to celebrate again together. To finish my little ecumenical bucket of flowers, I do quote from the last article from André Caramaga. New ecumenical vision for the church in Africa must be at the top of our ecclesiological agenda. And I do add, by giving even more attention to the theological ecumenical education. A little bucket of flowers to thank the authors to their outstanding work. Pas pro toto, I hand it over to Isabel. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Benjamin, for the presentation and for keeping to 9 minutes. So thank you. The major issue there is this whole question of Christianity in Africa that goes in at times you see it represented in ethnic groups. And it still goes back to what we heard from Dr. Henry, who maybe this town or this ethnic group, the Roman Catholics are there, the Anglicans will go there, and it becomes a problem today to handle this. Perhaps we can talk about this during the discussion session, part of the discussion part of the session. So we said earlier that Dr. Elieshi Mungure is not here, but the part of her presentation on issues and themes in African Christianity, Reverend Dr. Dietrich Werner will as well talk about that as he makes his own presentation. Dr. Dietrich Werner originally was assigned to and accepted to present the seventh part of the book, which is on public role of African Christianity. Reverend Dr. Dietrich Werner is a senior advisor for Theology, Ecumenical Education and Research, Bread for the World, and then he's also a co-editor. We had the story at the beginning. A former colleague here, director of ETE, Ecumenical Theological Education. He knows Africa very well. He has worked and has done a lot of work, African Theological Institutes. I personally have met a lot of young women and men who say thank you to Dietrich. And I keep telling him that he really, I think the young people in Africa, young theologians, will remain very grateful to you. Without moving, and then you flew in this morning to be part of this presentation. That shows how important this work was for you. I will let you present us the seventh part of this book, which is on the public role of African Christianity, and we'll be happy if you would say a word or two about what the issue was supposed to present on issues and themes in African Christianity.
Thank you, Father, for these very kind words. Dear friends, distinguished colleagues, after having listened to a lot already, let me start with a short remark more jokingly. What is the common feature and what might be the difference between the Bible and the Anthology of African Christianity? Very clear, both are big. Both are books of books, because the Bible also is a book of books. Both have taken long journey and long sustained, very demanding work to be produced. Both, to a certain extent, are also tradition setting. They set a certain kind of African Christianity tradition by describing now, in the beginning of 21st century, what actually are mainstreams, main themes, main issues, main thrusts of African Christianity. I don't know whether the Anthology of African Christianity will have the same normative function as biblical canon and biblical tradition have. I'm not insinuating this, but I would still claim, dear friends, that something like the Anthology of African Christianity is also contributing to what I would call inner cohesion, unity, and more dialogical listening within African Christianity. And that gives me also a privilege of having participated in this major endeavor as somebody who has come from Berlin, because we were reminded already by Dr. Henry that Berlin has played a very nasty role in the history of division and partition and major separation within the African continent, which is due to the famous Berlin Conference on Africa 1884, and we are very much aware of this as scholars in Berlin. But I hope that this book can also, in the long run, contribute to something like more unity, to healing within African Christianity, to more cohesion, to more inner dialogue within African Christianity. And therefore, let me give you 3 points at the beginning, what I think can be the function, the role, the contribution of this volume. We need more interconnectedness within African Christianities, within the diverse spectrum of African Christianities. That is a unique contribution also of the section we have not introduced, and that is section 4, which is the national profiles of African Christianity, because for the first time in history, I think, we have a volume which contains survey articles on almost all of the 54 countries in the African continent concerning their history of Christianity. And there is a lot of ignorance and also non-information between Southern African Christianities and Northern African Christianities. I have a great sympathy for the suffering Northern African Christian churches, which are really at stake, and they are struggling for survival in many of the northern African countries, particularly after the African Spring, and we should not forget about their situation. Although they are not members of WCC, we could not find their addresses here, nor in the ACC, because missing links and so on. But now, at least, you have a broad picture of all of them together. So strengthening interconnectedness, healing of memories, inner unity within the diverse spectrum of African Christianity is one first contribution. Second one, I work now as senior advisor to one of the biggest development agencies in Protestantism, which is an interesting experience, and I am also responsible for staff education. And I think this volume can play a huge role in staff education, because we are faced with two different kind of mandates now. We need to strengthen religious literacy in political and development agencies, in political sectors, in governments, and also in development agencies in the Act Alliance spectrum, which we have here in the House. Religious literacy, to know about religious trends, mentalities, traditions, dialects, is essential if you work with faith-based organization in politics, in peace strengthening, in development cooperation. But we also have this other dimension. We need to strengthen developmental literacy in Christian churches. And there we are in an important learning journey, but we are not yet at all at the end of the road. And again, this volume also gives very important insights in strengthening developmental literacy, areas of exploration in Christian political, prophetical witness and social ethics in African Christianity. And that has been the service of, to a certain extent, both Section 6 and Section 7, which is on the public role of African Christianity. And I think in this, and there comes a third momentum in here, this book also plays a role in contributing to what I would call a process of the third Reformation in African Christianity. And that is, by the way, a notion which is also used in the editorial which we formulated together. You can talk about the first Reformation as either referring to the classical European Reformation or to the arrival and planting of early Christianity on African soil. Second Reformation in Africa, then the emergence of African independent instituted churches, those who were founded by African spiritual and Christian leaders. And the third Reformation is what we talk about, Reformation cycle becoming full circle again, the dynamics between Reformation, reappropriation of biblical grounding of Christian faith, education, and social transformation. That is about African Christianity becoming literate, becoming articulated in the area of political witness, of social ethics. And you have so much evidence for this. And this is a particular focus of Section 7, which you have in this book. Section 6, to go back a bit, gives, because our colleague could not come now, identifies key areas of social, ethical, and ministerial concerns in the development of African Christianity, the dominant role of African church women organizations, a fascinating article of Molly Longworth, related closely together with another key article on women and African Christianity. This is the key strength of African Christianity, the role of women, both on the local, the regional, and the continental level. But also, then not to undermine, the demographic picture of African society is so much different from ours here in Switzerland or in Germany, with more than 40% of African population being below 25 years. So an article on, for instance, the Sunday school movements in African Christianity is a learning lesson for the future of children's ministry and Sunday school movements all around the globe. And you know that the ecumenical movement started with Global World Sunday School Association. So it's very important for us to be reminded of what is happening on the African ground with regard to the Sunday school. It's a very exciting movement now tying in with the child theology movement, which also comes strongly from that institute in southern Africa. Now, other aspects like human sexuality in African Christianity, key article from Esra Chitando from Mozambique, or the whole issue and controversial debate on prosperity gospel in African Christianity. It is not that we have just one trend. The Bible has many conflicts in itself between different parts of its tradition. And this book also is clear that we have certain controversial issues, that we have conflicts within African Christianity. But the African discourse has come of age. And African theology are able, to a fascinating extent, to articulate themselves critically one over against the other and trying to find the right path also in developing something like a sound theology or African theology of prosperity. That comes out very clearly here, or articles on decent work from Rowan Marie, migration and African Christianity, or then the whole issue of martyrs and witnesses of faith in African Christianity, fascinating panorama of articles in section 5. But I wanted to come to a close now in shedding a brief light on public role of African Christianity, which is a kind of a panorama of a very interesting African Reformation process. It's not just that African churches and Christianity is publicly visible, like if you travel in Great Accra region, you see a banner of different Pentecostal, charismatic or historical mainline churches on every second corner. So African Christianity is visible. The language of faith is much more visible than it is in any of the European cities. But what we mean here is that African Christianity, more than just being visible in the public arena, becomes articulated in the public space and speaks truth to power. And how is this done? This is kind of the key topic of section number 7. So you have a very interesting article of a colleague here from ACT Alliance Office, Jesaja Toroitich, mapping areas of public engagement of some 90 member organizations of ACT Alliance working on the African continent. Quite significant what they are doing. In Southern Africa, in South Sudan, in wherever fair trade issues, justice for coffee farmers, cash crop value systems, all the rest of it. Then you have an article from our former General Secretary, Samuel Kobia, on the contribution of African churches for conflict solution, reconciliation and peace building, which is, I think, one of the most pertinent articles still shedding light on the public role of African churches currently. Or you have senior figures like Jesse Mugambe, mentioned already from Kenya, on climate change, food security as a challenge for African security, or Bethuel Kiplagat, former ambassador of Africa to European countries, on the relations between the AACC and the African Union, which is complemented in terms of the article by another scholar, actually also a co-worker here in the house from Obiora Ike, who has written on the AU Agenda 2063. You know, the African Union has articulated its own kind of vision for sustainable development on the African continent, and the question of how African Christianity can feed into this. I think this is kind of a chapter which is work in progress, because this is in the midst, and you know, we are marching towards a situation 2018 when we have the next AACC assembly, probably in Rwanda, where this topic, how can African Christianity contribute to the achievement of the SDG goals in the African continent, will be the core topic there. So we hope that our book can also enrich this process. Now, to come to a final remark, this section number 7, apart from the kind of thematic areas covered, also is interwoven with some other articles which shed some light on the more foundational conceptual ground for becoming engaged in public theologies. And I mentioned articles like Nico Koopman, Stellenbosch, your colleague Public Theology in African Churches, or Titus Pacho, African Churches and Good Governance, the late Professor Steve de Groot from Witemaris book Religion and Development in African Theology, or Gerald West, Relevance of Body Theology for Development in African Christianity. Highly interesting, It is not kind of a concluded chapter, this is work in progress, but it sheds light on some very significant trends. But in anticipating some of your critical questions, I will also say in closing one critical self-observation. If you look through the list of authors, you will clearly realize that there is a certain predominance, particularly in the last section, on authors coming from Southern African universities and institutions. We cannot hide this. This reflects also kind of not our intentional bias, but it simply was not easy to identify certain authors, but it reflects also certain imbalances within African Christianity. If you do a sound survey on where do we have institutions, research institutes, deliberate programs on public theology, social ethics, institutes for theology of development, I would be very interested. If some of you can do a survey like this, please share with me. I think we have certain imbalances within African Christianity. So we hope that this book can also stimulate and increase inter-regional learning on public theology, social ethics, and theology in development, because this would contribute to what we call a third reformation in African Christianity, African Christianity articulating itself vis-à-vis the political bodies, also vis-à-vis African Union and vis-à-vis the United Nations offices. We have found some interest in this with this book also in the AU. People have shared with us, well, what we need next one is for the Muslims to come with a similar volume on the Muslim world in Africa. We would be very happy if there could be a similar volume. Let's see what comes out of this. But it has been a great joy for me to serve with my limited capacity in the editorial board and to continue the friendship with the senior editors and the whole group. It has been of tremendous enrichment for me, and I hope that some ways of collaboration can follow from this. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you. Well, I thank the panelists, and thank you for giving your attention, listening, and taking notes. Without going any further, we have we have about 15 minutes to stay here, and I'll see how I manage the time. What we have now is the interaction time, the question time. And I will expect you to come up with your questions. I would just want to make a plea. Let your first sentence be the question. And then if you need a background, you can then add. Don't begin with a background and then give the question. But just begin with a question. If you then need a background to it, you can add. Thank you.
Yes, I'm very honored to come here to find great books. I'm from China. I'm a Christian pioneer and founder of Agape Foundation. So we are close friends with. Yeah, so from Christoph, I understand it's very good news. I even see the book before, I think. So firstly, I hope I can translate.
So the question now.
Yeah, sorry. Mm-hmm. The question is, I cannot find about African Christianity, about economy and business part.
Economy and business.
Part study. So why not, influence the businessmen or enterprise or entrepreneurship or economy development? What's the relationship between church or Christianity and business?
Okay.
Second is, why not do some comparative study? Africa, Asia, or others, developing country, what happened Christianity, compare them. What's the difference, what's the future? Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Maybe I'll leave that, maybe.
We collect
the questions and then, yeah, exactly.
Yeah. To see who's responding to what.
For me, it's the title.
The
wish
title.
the title is Christianity in Africa.
You wish the title
Is
Christianity in Africa.
For me, African Christianity, I don't know, in Sudan, South Sudan, how people will take it. For them, they will say, what does it mean? Is it a new Bible? Or what does it mean African? Because South Sudan has so many tribes
Okay.
already.
I'm also Defenbach from the Lutheran World Federation. The question, what questions should the LWF be asking when it has its assembly in Namibia in May? And the background is that the largest member church of the LWF is now the Ethiopian member church. The second largest is the Tanzanian one. And the LWF in the 500th anniversary year of the Reformation has decided to have its assembly in Africa, in part to show that the Reformation is a global citizen.
Thank you.
You say that in Africa, Christianity is increasing at an incredible rate. I'm just interested to know which denomination in particular is increasing. Is one much more than others? I'm just like to know a little bit because I don't know much about that.
I was very interested to hear about what you might call counterproductive aspects of Christianity in Africa. And the question is there a role for ecumenism and how would it work in overcoming some of the ambiguities of historic Christianity about, well, the prosperity gospel, for instance, about attitudes toward wealth and so on, or about some counterproductive notions of healing as they figure in addressing HIV, or about biblicism. What's the role of the ecumenical organizations and movement in renewing and reforming Christianity itself?
Okay, can I just see if you can raise your hand if you intend to ask a question? Okay, 1, 2, 3. Okay.
Yeah, some have said Christianity in Africa is a mile wide, but an inch deep. I don't know to what extent this book goes that saying right or wrong.
No, I didn't get the question. What is the question?
Some have said Christianity.
No, what?
Okay,
Okay, got
to
it.
what extent does this book prove that statement
Okay.
right or wrong?
Okay.
Whether it's right or wrong.
Taking up a remark, same remark of Dietrich on research institutions in Africa, just a question. Is there already a directory of research institutions on African Christianity or Christianity in Africa? And if not, I think it would be worth to do. We have in Global Ethics Net the directory of theological institutions, the largest in the world. It's 7,000 theological institutions, so you can break it down, but that's on theological institutions, training institutions, seminaries, universities, and so on. But specifically on research institutes, I think, I would be interested if you know if it exists.
Yeah, Stephen Brown, editor of the Ecumenical Review. My question is whether, having done this work on this volume and looked at African Christianity, whether you feel that with the global ecumenical movement, African Christianity is sufficiently represented. And if it isn't, is that due to the ecumenical movement globally, or does that an issue for African Christianity itself?
Thank you. We try to distribute and see. Maybe I haven't finished it right. Maybe we begin with you. Begin to talk to. I would rather prefer a solution not some within the same questions. But, each person has 1 or 2 questions. So can you answer the one first of all on economy and business, since you dealt with that other too?
Well, thanks a lot for this highly interesting question. It also indicates that we are work in progress here, both with regard to documenting current trends in African Christianity and also with regard to this book. Isabel has shared at the beginning that we hope other scholars to build on our work, and that is our intention. We are aware of certain omissions, thematic-wise. There is no network of African entrepreneurs, Christian entrepreneurs, as far as I know. And we have not seen kind of a developed African Christian business ethics, although we are aware of the fact that in Nigeria, there are some, and also in Ghana, there are some beginning associations of Christian businessmen. That would be something which could easily be added, but could not fulfill within this volume, because actually, physically, this is the biggest you can put through in the book. So we hope for other occasions. Might be on growth of African Christianity, although others can also contribute.
Henry to maybe
Yeah. Okay.
do about the growth of African Christianity and then
which denominations are
growing
fast?
Yeah, I think that's a very interesting question. In terms of the survey, and why?
Why more one than another?
Yeah, and it's an interesting question which has got quite dimensions of answers to it. Now, in general, almost all denominations are growing. Of course, having said that, it cannot be said about each and every region of Africa. Things cannot be the same. I mean, for instance, the Roman Catholic Church has been growing tremendously. And it is, besides what I said earlier on, in terms of colonial factor, competition, there's the issue of resources. The Roman Catholic Church had more resources comparatively than others, but also more educational institutions which were critical to the development of Christianity. Education was the most important factor in the spread of Christianity on the continent. But also the issue of African culture. The issue of African culture is very, very critical to the growth of African Christianity. On the whole, the Roman Catholic Church seemed to be more accommodating to African culture than other churches. The Protestants are very evangelical, the word. The Roman Catholic Church, in terms of its ecclesiology and those kind of issues, it was much more accommodating to the culture. So there's been that sort of, the growth has been very, very fast. But even also the evangelical churches or the Reformed churches, Protestant, they have also been growing in some areas, but also there's been some decline. But on the whole, the picture is one of great growth.
Okay, to the LWF assembly. When you look at African Christianity, the issue is the theology is influenced by its social context, right? So the LWF needs to ask itself, what are the signs of our times in Africa now that we should be responding to? People from different parts of Africa will respond to that question differently based on, their concerns. Right? For me, I would say when I look at the signs of our times, I would say issues of human sexuality are a big issue. It's dividing the churches across denominations, but also between partners from the global south with the global north. And within the families, it's dividing people, because whilst traditionally people just accepted things as they were. Now that you have to talk about them, it's becoming a divisive issue, right? So science of our times is crucial in influencing the content of our theological reflection in Africa. And then on Christianity being a mile wide and an inch deep, I think that was not the issue for us when writing this book. The aim was to look at okay, how do the Africans understand their own faith? Who are they as Africans responding to what is going on in their context? So who is measuring this 1 inch, right? If it's somebody from outside, then it would be artificial measurements of the depth of African Christianity. If it's me measuring my own depth, I would say it's deeply rooted, because it's not artificial Christianity, but it's Christianity that defines and makes who I am in every area of my life. So usually when they are talking about it's very it's 1 inch deep. They are trying to say that it's not taking root, okay, in the African continent. But the assumption to that question is that Christianity is foreign. But I'm saying that Christianity is an African religion. So people look at African Christianity as defining who they are.
Thank you.
There was a question about globality of African Christianity or Christianity from Africa. And indeed, I would say this is a very crucial question, especially at the beginning of the 21st century, because we have people from Africa all over the world. And they are bringing their religion with, and they're bringing Christianity with. So we have many, many churches of African origins, as I like to call them, in the diaspora, in the States, in Europe, and even in Asia. And some 10 years ago, I published a book with the title From Migrants to Missionaries, about churches of African origin. And this was a survey about the different churches that we do have in Europe, especially in the German context. And in cities like Hamburg, Berlin, and Frankfurt, you have more than 100, 150 churches of African origin. Some of them are affiliated to bigger church bodies. Some of them do belong to the Presbyterian Church of Ghana or Cameroon. Others are belonging to the Lutherans. But there are many, many of them who are so-called diasporic ecclesiogenesis, born in the diaspora, born in the foreign country. And here there is a vast diversity also about churches of African origin. And it is interesting to see the first generation was very much missionary oriented towards the new home, away from home. And the second generation was going into other directions, into being at home over there in the American context, in the German context, in the European context. And now with the third generation growing bigger, older, we realize that many of them are oriented again towards Africa and searching for roots back home in Africa from their grandparents. And here a lot of research needs to be done, but this is very interesting to see how connections network is starting again between churches in the diaspora and on the African continent.
Just to briefly relate to two of the questions and relating them also to some other perspectives. There are several tasks which are on our agenda in the ecumenical movement after this book. One of the questions has been, is there a directory of research institutions of African Christianity, or a related one? Is there a network of people doing business ethics in African context? I think there is none. It is one task we ought to do, to create a network of research institutions of African Christianity. I am not aware of a regular meeting. The situation is that in Southern Africa, or South Africa specifically, the academic disciplines of doing research are much better connected than they are in the overall continent, because it's a matter of better connectivity within South Africa, but not on the continental level. We need to have a continental African level for people doing public theology. That's what we discussed earlier before we entered this forum. We could have something like urgently needed in all African theological scholarship program, which I have been arguing for since many years, still not in place. We are failing the future of African younger theologians while not giving them proper means to do research and to finalize their PhD projects. It is so difficult to get hold of the very few existing scholarships for the future generation. How can we expect African Christianity to grow, to develop competence, if there is nothing like a theological education fund for Africa? The global ecumenical movement started with TEF. Now we are all moving away from scholarships. That is a scandal. If we want to promote future research and scholarship in African Christianity, in public theology, in African social ethics, and so on, we have to invent an African theological scholarship fund. I think that would be something. And then also another, just a final one. Yes, we need more comparative studies and dialogue between African Christianity, Chinese Christianity, Asian Christianity. We need informed ecumenism. This is a tool for informed African ecumenism. Can't we not dream that in 10 or 20 years from now, we have an anthology of Asian Christianity, of contemporary Asian Christianity, an anthology of Chinese Christianity, my vision for your networks, an anthology of Latin American Christianity. Ecumenism will have a future only if it is informed ecumenism. We have so many of common declarations, but we have so little in terms of accurate knowledge on contemporary Christianities. We have a new volume on Orthodox Christianities, where Daniel Buddha played a major role also in contributing. But we don't have similar volumes which can serve as a platform for information for governments, for staff in development agencies. So we do not render the service others are expecting from us, because the international discourse in UN circles and wherever, they cry out, they urgently demand for the participation of faith-based organizations. Everybody now is opening the windows. We welcome all the faith-based organizations, please come in. But where do we have good knowledge on where to identify FBOs in Asia, in other contexts? It is the task of the ecumenical movement to come up with solid sources for informed ecumenism in order also then to strengthen intercontinental dialogue. Like I can exemplify this on the relation between China and Africa, which is a huge topic, but time does not allow.
Thank you. Well, what would have been, or what should be the question in our minds as we come to the end of this is what we will be talking about in the next 5 years. After this, after the Anthology of African Christianity, what next? What fruits are we looking forward to reap from this? And where does this lead us to? I've heard already from the questions, from the answers, we have already, started talking about some of the areas that we can move into. But then the work continues. The anthology, as Dietrich said, is a tool for informed African ecumenism. And I think it is the same, it will continue to be a tool. So as a tool, it's supposed to serve for our work ahead. So I thank you for your attention. I thank you for your participation. I thank the panel. And I sincerely thank the co-editors here and the editors, the contributors, the publishers, and in a special way, our communication team here, Marianne, Michael West, Zanti, and everybody who has worked behind the scenes to get this prepared. Now I leave Michael, do you have?
Just a few things. We still have some copies. We've set aside copies for participants in this meeting. If you would like a copy that you could use in your work and so on, please see me. We have a couple right here, and we have others elsewhere. Also, WCC staff at 1:15, they should be downstairs to get their ecumenical bottle. Their the blue community.
Okay, thank you very much.